Welcome back. So the country is talking about a government of national unity and what it will entail, whether or not our politicians are mature enough to reach an agreement, how they'll implement it and still keep the state of the country certainly stable, that is. We are joined to analyze a lot of these topics and we're joined in studio by Moeletsi Mbeki, who is of course a political analyst, and he's voiced his opinion saying there is no need for South Africans to panic. He believes that our democracy is evolving and that the incoming government of national unity must speak to that when it comes to policy, to service delivery and accountability. He joins us in studio for more on this morning. Mr. Mbeki, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. It is such an exciting time for our country, isn't it? I mean, we watch all the changes that are happening, the words that are being used, a government of national unity. We can talk on and about that. But one of the things that we've heard in the run-up to this election is it's a watershed moment. And you've said it's not.
Yes, I don't think it's a watershed moment. You know, democracy, governments come and go. For example, Donald Trump, let's take the United States. He was president of the United States from whatever year it was, and then he lost the election, and Joe Biden from another political party won the election. There is an election that's coming up in Britain in July, and the opposition party is 20 points ahead of the governing party. So that's how democracy works. It doesn't become watershed just because you change political parties.
Yeah, I think that it is interesting in the context of South Africa, where we had a political party for 30 years, though. And I wonder if perhaps this comes from a culture that's been believed in South Africa for so long, that while the governing party is the African National Congress, I suppose the question is, are South Africans, in your view, ready to understand that, well, this is how democracy works, and that we weren't voting out of anger? Well,
it's the South Africans who voted out the African National Congress, so they are ready for it. Otherwise, they would have voted for it to come back as the government. So they are ready to change leadership of the country. And which is good for South Africa. I think that's how democracy works, so that if one party does not perform to the satisfaction of the voters, then the voters choose another party to replace it. So I think we have to get used to that's how democracy works, and it's good for the country. And there's no reason to panic. I know that, you know, everybody's watching every cent about the rand to the US dollar exchange rate. But these are big, many issues affect the exchange rate. It's not just one issue. So don't keep your eye watching the dollar-rand exchange rate. Get on with your normal work. That's really what we're supposed to do to build our country, by working, not by watching politicians on TV. So let's get on with our job and build the country.
There's something, I wonder if you find it poetic, if at all, that you've got the African National Congress putting on the table this idea of a government of national unity 30 years into democracy, when 30 years, this is what we were talking about as a country. A very different idea of a government of national unity, but certainly what the ANC is putting on the table. What were your thoughts when you heard President of the African National Congress, Cyril Ramaphosa, saying, this is what the party's decided, this is what we are pursuing? In your view, is it a step in the right direction for the party?
Well, it's one of the scenarios. There's no stipulation in the Constitution about it. So if I were the ANC, I would make the same suggestion, because it means that I'm still in the government. You see, so it is to the ANC's advantage if that's what other parties adopted. It means it continues to be part of the government instead of going to the opposition benches. There's another scenario, which is that the other parties, besides which have 60% of the vote, if they agree amongst themselves, they can choose their own president and set up their own government. Whether that will be called a government of national unity, I don't know. It will be government of opposition unity, so maybe. So that's another scenario. You can get another scenario where 2 or 3, let's say the ANC and the DA agree between themselves, or the ANC and MK party. Then you have a coalition. So there are many scenarios. The ANC has put one on the table, which is fine. But at the end of the day, the other parties have to support it because the ANC on its own can't choose the government.
Unfortunately, you paint this idea of what is possible, and especially when you look at the numbers, right? 40% to the ANC, which means the other parties take the other 60. The likelihood of them working together, I mean, slim to none. When you've got a party like the EFF, Floyd Shivambu coming out emphatically yesterday and saying, well, we refuse to be part of this government of national unity if we are asked to work with the Democratic Alliance or the Freedom Front Plus. So there's still a sense that the ANC is still very much at the center of deciding the way forward. Do you think, from what you've heard from the various political parties so far in these coalition talks, that there is a sense that their egos are being put aside and that they're really thinking about what's most necessary for the country? The Action SA, for instance, has said that they've even stepped out of the multi-party charter as a result of not wanting to work with the ANC. Is the right tone being used?
Well, I think it's choice. You see, so we have to be used to people making choices. If Action SA makes the choice that it doesn't want to work with the ANC, that's its choice, and it's entitled to make that choice. So presumably that means that if there's a government of national unity, they will be an opposition to that government. If the EFF doesn't want to work with somebody else who is part of the bigger government of national unity, well, they go to the opposition benches. So we have to be familiar with the fact that there are choices in the world. We as citizens make choices every day. Will I buy white bread or brown bread? That's a choice, which is the same as Mr. Mashaba's choice. Will he work or won't he work with the ANC? It's his choice. He's entitled to make that choice. So I don't think this is a problem. There are those, let us assume the majority of the parties support the idea of a national unity, and they team up with the ANC and they form the government. Then there are already 2 parties which are saying we won't work with it, which is the EFF and Action SA. Then they go to the opposition benches and oppose this government of national unity. Yeah,
part of the contention, of course, is around the policy directions and proposals that are put forward by the various political parties that, again, differ. You compare, for instance, the MK party and its ideas on land, very similar to what the EFF is proposing. On the other hand, you've got a party like the Democratic Alliance that says do away with the minimum wage subsidy. And this is what I found quite interesting. You've actually put forward the idea that it is time that we compromise and let go of broad-based black economic empowerment. Why is the time now?
Well, I have always opposed black economic empowerment because what black economic empowerment says, which is not the written one, is the small print. The small print is saying black people are inferior. They cannot set up their own companies. They must be junior partners to white-owned companies, and they must just sit there and get dividends for owning 26%, which they didn't pay for. So it is the underwriting, the underlying message of black economic empowerment is that black people are inferior. I am opposed to that notion.
What then do we do about the need to address the past? I mean, it's a reality. When you look at inequality in this country, when you look at the unemployment numbers, those numbers primarily are the black South Africans for the most part of it. And there is still the argument that in this 30 years of our democracy, we haven't addressed inequality. We haven't addressed access to opportunity for vulnerable black people to bring them up to par with their white counterparts. How do we do that in a new dispensation?
Well, you can't address the past. The past is the past. If you try to address the past, as they say, you are driving with looking through the rear view mirror, and then you're going to crash against something. We have to address the future. We have to build a future of South Africa, not to build a past. You can't build a past. So we have to sort out how do we build the past and the future of South Africa. First, black South Africans are 90% of the population. So they have to be the primary builders of the future of the country. They are the majority, the big majority of the country. The African colored Indians are 90% or 92% now of the population. So the future of South Africa depends on them building, not receiving free rides from 8% of the population, which are the white population. If they are going to be fed by 8%, then this country has absolutely no future. This 92% has to get down and build the country. By building the country, it means they have to set up new companies, they have to start new industries, they have to build new mines. They have to build it, not as guys sitting with 26% of a white-owned company. They have to build their own mine themselves. That's how you're going to build the future of South Africa.
Do we maintain a national minimum wage?
Well, personally, I worked for COSATU in the early 90s, and I was surprised to see COSATU advocating a minimum wage, because when I worked for COSATU, they were opposed to a minimum wage. They said government fixing a minimum wage undermines the power of the trade union to negotiate. So now I'm not sure why they changed their mind. But a minimum wage fixed by the government is a double-edged sword. It weakens the unions because it weakens their bargaining strength, their bargaining chips. So, but if the unions like COSATU feel that they are so weak now that they need government to fix the wages, well, it says a lot about the trade unions rather than whether we need or we don't need a minimum wage. It means our trade unions are weak and are not in a position to negotiate. So to me, my message is go and strengthen your trade unions and negotiate the wage yourself.
Yeah. There's the land question as well, Mr. Mbeki. I mean, for decades we've talked about, okay, let's look at Section 5 of the Constitution. To some extent we've passed on land expropriation, but we have not seen a lot of land handed back to what some would call its rightful owners in a new dispensation. And I like using that word because, you know, we've got the opportunity to now. In a new dispensation, what do we say to those that say, our land?
Well, if you gave me land tomorrow, I would have no idea what to do with it. I don't know how to farm. I wouldn't know how to drive a tractor. I wouldn't know where to put a maize seed when. So there is a myth in which the politicians are perpetrating, that every African person in South Africa is a peasant and therefore wants to go back to the land and become a farmer. That's absolute nonsense. The majority of African people in South Africa live in the urban areas, and they live especially in the metros, and they know nothing about farming. So to perpetuate the myth that every African person is a peasant who wants to have a few cows and a plow and to go and plow a field and grow maize, it's a fantasy. I don't know how we can get this fun. You know, every society has myths. This is one of our myths amongst the black South Africans. It's a myth that, you know, we are such and such. These are stereotypes. You see, people have stereotypes which they then believe, which have nothing to do with reality. It's very sad to find big political parties wasting their time talking about expropriating land. From whom to whom? The land in South Africa is owned by South African citizens. If you want to buy a farm, if you want to grow maize and you want to buy a farm, there are farms on the market every day of the week, every day of the year. You can go and buy one. You can buy a wine farm if you want. You can buy a cattle farm if you want. You can buy any farm in South Africa. In the past, under apartheid, you couldn't. Well, there is no longer apartheid. You can buy a farm if you have the money, or if your bank will lend you the money, you can buy a farm. But you have to pay back the money you borrow from the bank.
I must ask you this, because it's interesting that you earlier made the example of what you said years ago, COSATU's beliefs and their rejection many years ago of a national minimum wage. Well, they stand by it today as something that's necessary. Just recently, we spoke to the South African Communist Party that says that the ANC should not work with the Democratic Alliance and it should not work with the MK Party. And I mean, this is the Communist Party. One of the things you talk about is that the reality is we are living in a capitalist nation. Is it possible that perhaps even for the African National Congress, the tripartite alliance is no longer relevant?
Well, I actually don't think, I think the tripartite alliance exists on paper only. Okay, it dishes out jobs to members of the different organizations. But in real terms, no, the ANC works, does whatever it does, it decides whatever it decides, whatever COSATU or the Communist Party say.
One of the suggestions that's been put forward, let's go back to this government of national unity. One of the suggestions that's been put forward is, if the ANC were to work with, you know, let's talk about just a government of national unity, that then you need a split between, you know, who runs legislature and certainly who runs the executive and cabinet, right? And the model that's available there for accountability. Where are you seeing the red flags and opportunities in the talks that are happening now, particularly around accountability? I mean, you must look at, for instance, an entity like Eskom and how it responds to the Department of Public Enterprise and the department's responsibility to account to Parliament. How do we do that where there is clear accountability throughout that thread?
Well, there's nothing that says there should be a division between who runs the legislature and who runs the exec. It's what the parties who are members, let's say, of this government of national unity, they decide. They have to decide amongst themselves. They have to elect the speaker, they have to elect the deputy speaker, they have to elect the president. That's how the system, the Constitution says that's how you operate. And whether the speaker comes from the EFF or the ANC or whatever, it's a decision amongst themselves. But the majority of members of parliament sitting 14 days after the election results have been announced have to elect a speaker of parliament, and they have to elect a deputy speaker, and they have to elect the president of South Africa. Now, what the agreements amongst themselves is, well, it's a matter of their own agreements amongst the political parties, but they have to elect.
Going into these talks, a few political parties have said, yes, let's sit down, let's talk, right? IFP certainly says they're ready to talk with the ANC. The Action SA has said, the door's open, come, let's talk. The EFF has said, come to us, we can sit and talk. What are the policy priorities that you think we simply cannot abandon in those talks?
Well, first, the priority is that everything has to happen within the Constitution of South Africa. It can't happen outside the Constitution of South Africa. Anyone who wants something outside the Constitution of South Africa, well, they will not get it, because everything has to be done according to the Constitution. I think what the ANC really should do, it should, on Monday or tomorrow, call all the members of parliament and say, what do we agree on? What do we want to happen? And let them decide. Those who are saying, we will not come because the DA is there, or the DA said we will not come because the EF is there, then they don't come. But it's much simpler than people are making it out to be. The ANC or one of the parties convene a meeting with no conditions, and then they decide amongst themselves, the elected members of parliament, what is a government of national unity? What exactly will it do? And those who want to be part of it become part of it. Those who don't want to be part of it say, no, we won't be part of it, but we will still take our seats in parliament, and then we will be the opposition.